Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome to the channel. So today we'll be comparing the cameras of the iPhone 7 and the iPhone XR. This video is for those people who can't decide if the leap in camera tech is good enough to warrant an upgrade. I'll mostly be showing you only those scenarios where XR has an advantage over the 7 and then you can decide if these changes are big enough. So let's start off with the spec sheet. At first glance you might think that nothing has changed spec wise, but there are a few differences. So obviously the sensor itself is 30% larger than the iPhone 8 sensor, and the iPhone 8's sensor was bigger than that of the iPhone 7's. It's a much bigger sensor with bigger and deeper pixels. Pixel size is 1.4 micron. Next, the sensor is much faster also, improves the time it takes to focus. The main difference I'd say is software, the inclusion of computational photography. So one of the biggest changes is how XR does HDR. XR has something called Smart HDR on by default. So what Smart HDR does is, it takes multiple different shots at various exposures and stitches them together to make a perfectly exposed HDR photo. Let's look at a few examples. These shots were taken during broad daylight. So in all of these photos, XR ends up retaining more details in the shadows and highlights, and the shot is better exposed than that of the 7 too. The XR's photo also might end up looking wider. That's just because the XR has a wider lens. So next, let's look at a portrait shot. So XR has the ability to take portrait shots with portrait lighting and has depth control too, unlike any other iPhone with a single camera. So I'll just be using a non-portrait shot on the 7 to show the difference. Also, there are only 3 portrait lighting effects available on the XR. In this shot too, the 7 ends up looking much worse because the subject isn't exposed properly and the dynamic range is bad too. Now let's look at a few photos where you might be hard pressed to find the differences between both the phones. In these shots too, there are very minor differences between the cameras, but almost always the XR's photo looks correctly exposed. Now let's look at a few low light photos. Here we notice a huge difference between the XR and the 7. XR always ends up retaining much more detail. Another big difference is how the XR handles flash photography. Slow sync flash enables the XR to expose the photo properly and retain more detail even when the flash is on. Now let's look at a few shots from the front camera. Here the Smart HDR isn't as aggressive after the iOS 12.1 update, but it's still noticeable. XR shots are better exposed and retain more HDR details. In low light photos too, the XR ends up retaining more detail, but once the flash is turned on, you start to notice a real difference. XR's photo ends up being much sharper and well exposed. Now let's look at videos. XR can shoot 4K at 60 fps and shoot with extended dynamic range at 30 fps or below. And it has stereo recording too. So I was unable to demonstrate 4K at 60 fps, but here's a clip at 30 fps with extended dynamic range.
Hey, so now I'm testing the stereo recording and the front camera video on both of these phones. So the front camera is also supposed to have extended dynamic range on the XR, and right now the audio is coming from the XR. This has stereo recording, and now let's switch to the 7. So 7 is not supposed to have stereo recording and it's supposed to record at just it's supposed to have just mono recording, and looks like the XR's image is a little cropped in than usual. I guess yeah, it is definitely cropped in than usual. So both are recording at 1080p and the XR's video should be more stabilized. Let me know what you think of the audio. I'm guessing the XR should have better audio.
Now let's look at slow-mo. Here too, the XR is capable of recording at 1080p to 40 fps, whereas the 7 is limited to 720p to 40 fps or 1080p at 120 fps. So the XR ends up looking much sharper and ends up focusing better because of the faster sensor too. So that's it for the video guys. Hope it helped you decide if it is worth the upgrade. Like the video if you found it to be helpful, and also subscribe to the channel for more videos on the XR. And also subscribe to my friend Sisir's channel too. He's the one who lent me his iPhone 7 to make this video. The link to his channel will be on the top of the description and also on the screen right now. And yeah, peace out.
Neverland.